Do I know enough about oak casks? Will I be loud enough? What if they ask me about cut points and fermentation times? What if they hate my dad jokes? So about 10 years ago, I found myself hosting my first ever whiskey tasting in Puerto Rico in a hotel called the Condado Vanderbilt in front of 30 of the island's best bartenders. And adding to the anxiety of being my first ever whiskey tasting, I was also expected to be presenting it in Spanish because my new boss had over-elaborated to the Bacardi team in Latin America about my Spanish skills after living in Barcelona for 3 years. But actually the main reason I was panicking was nothing to do with my Spanish abilities or my whiskey knowledge. It was everything to do with the fact that I hit the clicker on the PowerPoint presentation, which sped through all 60 slides. So I spent the first 2 minutes of the presentation trying to rewind everything to start again, totally compromising my composure and learning the most valuable lesson, which is never to use bloody PowerPoint slides in a whiskey tasting. So then I basically spent the next 6 weeks doing every conceivable whiskey tasting scenario imaginable from 8 a.m. till midnight in front of journalists, bartenders, media, consumers, seating, standing, doing tastings on TV and on the radio, and basically a proper trial by fire. And since then, I've probably hosted up to 1,000 whiskey tastings in every scenario imaginable on beaches and hotels and castles, on the top of a hill, in airports, bars, restaurants, pubs, hotels, at trade networking events, at private events, at birthdays, at weddings, every scenario imaginable in over 40 countries. And if you're about to be hosting your own whiskey tasting for the first time, I'm going to give you some tips, tricks, and ideas to nail down all the details to give you the perfect flow so you don't have to worry about all the potential things that could go wrong, and you can just stand there enjoying being the host of the most. So to get to where you're going and setting up your first whiskey tasting extravaganza, the best way to lay it out is to actually go in reverse order of what makes a really good whiskey tasting. So from top to bottom, the secret recipe for the best whiskey tasting is the host, the whiskies, the people, the location, and the occasion. So when I'm planning a whiskey tasting, I always start with the occasion first because that sets the entire scene and theme for everything else that follows. So pretty much every beverage has its perceived occasion: champagne for celebrations, tequila for parties, wine for food and dinner pairings, vodka for aperitifs, and whiskey pretty much does all of these and more. So whether it's a milestone birthday, an anniversary, a wedding, a private client dinner, or hosting friends, whiskey's greatest superpower is bringing people together through its stories, its history, and the endless dialogue of what makes whiskey whiskey. So straight away, if someone comes to me and says, can you do a whiskey tasting for a 21st birthday? My mind's going, okay, we're going to do a lineup of 5 whiskeys going 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Or if it's an outdoor barbecues affair, I'm going to ask what's getting cooked so I can think about what whiskeys are going to pair nicely with the grilled goodies. Maybe I'm going to go with something rich, umami and fruity and a little bit peaty like Glenglass Port Soy with maybe a bit of sand end for dessert afterwards. And if you're working in hospitality or whiskey as a tour guide, a bartender, a brand ambassador, the occasion is probably going to be a brand training, a brand launch, a brand lunch. What's going to set apart your whiskey tasting from all the other ones your guests and attendees have been to, and trust me, they've been to a lot. And beyond entertaining your guests, your clients, your friends, you can upend a lot of well-worn myths about whiskey, such as that it's just for after dinner. And if your first notion when organising a whiskey tasting is to order tartan tablecloth and oatcakes, then I can tell you right now you've already failed. The location and venue need a lot of consideration and thought because ultimately they're going to make or break your vibes, your budget, or occasionally your whiskey and glassware if not thought out properly. For example, if you haven't done a recce or a risk assessment with your location or venue in advance, then you can't blame anyone when you trip over a loose cable or slip on some wet grass and smash all of your expensive whiskey and glassware. If you're doing a ticketed whiskey tasting, your venue hire could wipe out your ticket sales before you've started. So can you find somewhere that has a bar like a hotel, for example, you can drive some spend to on one of their quieter nights in exchange for the room for an hour for free. If the venue you're working in has limited space, can you do a standing whiskey bar instead of doing a seated whiskey tasting? This offers a far more relaxed affair and is perfect for weddings, trade shows, and networking events. If you're planning a beach whiskey tasting, what's your backup plan for when it rains? Does your 4th floor venue you've just hired in London have an elevator for loading in and out with all your whiskey and glassware? How far do you have to travel to get there? Is accommodation included if you finish the whiskey tasting at 10 o'clock and have to drive 3 hours home in the dark? Then there's all the little things like lighting, temperature, equipment on site. What does the venue have that you need that you can borrow that you don't have to buy? Like PA systems, water glasses, water jugs. You can save a lot of money on your budget if the venue already has these things you can borrow. So the one thing I always do once I'm finished setting up the tasting, I sit down where the guest is going to be sitting and I think to myself, what's the temperature like? What's the lighting like? I'm always putting myself in their shoes, because if, for example, it's a castle in July and you're hot setting up because they've got the fire roaring and the heating's on, you're thinking, okay, everyone's going to be melting, but maybe your guests are coming from the Caribbean and actually this is really cold for them, so they need the heating on. So ultimately, with venues and locations, the devil's in the details, and spreadsheets are your holy water. And always invest in a collapsible sack truck to save your back. So every time a comedian rocks up in a new country, they've already got a new raft of material and jokes ready, and doing whiskey tastings is absolutely no different. But on top of your mind as well as who's the audience going to be, where they're from, are they actually all going to turn up? For example, I once flew 14 hours each way from London to Kuala Lumpur to end up just doing 2 whiskey tastings for 2 groups of bartenders, and less than 5 showed up for each one, which was largely down to the poor location and time of the week choice from the organisers, because the bartenders had to be work at 5 on the other side of town. Hopefully it's not to do with the calibre of my chat. On top of that as well, my suitcases never turned up too. And arguably, ticketed whiskey tastings are the hardest ones to pull off, because you've got endless promotion, you've got a trial and error with different websites. The best thing to do is just make sure you're not clashing with any other events on that day of the week. And it is amazing getting a full house, but did you bring the extra glassware and whiskey in case 5 extra people turn up? And also, if you're not in control of the guest list and being asked to host the whiskey tasting, read the room in advance as much as possible by asking who's going to be there, what's their experience of whiskey. Are they all brand new to whiskey, or are they seasoned hardcore whiskey veterans with indestructible palates? So for example, if I'm hosting a group of 20 American tourists, I'm always going to make sure there's an American oak forward single malt in there, so I can personally thank them for drinking all that bourbon and sending us million of oak casks to put Scottish whiskey in. And if your audience is bartenders and trade media, they might want to know more of the nerdy details that, say, tourists don't. For example, fermentation times, still shapes, cut points, how to use the whiskey in cocktails. But you're not there as a PDF of information just spewing out facts. You've got to find the narrative and join the dots and tell the stories the same way. And also be prepared for the conversation to go off in weird tangents, which is sometimes the best part, and learn how to pull it all back in again. And if you're doing ticket tastings, always have a good hook or name for the event, and always invite really well-connected people, because if they like the idea of your event and tasting, then they'll invite all their friends and do a lot of the heavy lifting for you when it comes to ticket sales. So finally, down to the all-important part. What the hell are we tasting, and how many? So for quantity of whiskies, 5 is the norm. It gives you the best spectrum of comparison between drams. But I did an event last year for charity where we did 3 different whiskies, and that was probably one of the favourite ones I've ever hosted. So it really does depend on the timing and the occasion. So the theme of the tasting is where your creativity shines. Are you going to do the best of peated? Is it going to be the toast of the coast? Are you going to do the best 21-year-old whiskies? Ultimately, it's all down to you, but knowing your audience preferences in advance is going to help you decide. So when it comes to age statements, if you're a brand ambassador, you're probably working through age statements on a core range, like a non-age statement of 12, a 15, 18, 21, 25, to talk about the difference in oak casks. But if you're not, then, you know, the world's your oyster. You could do a non-age statement tasting of 5 really amazing drams. You don't have to break the bank when it comes to choosing whiskies. Don't always have to be super old, super expensive. Using oak and cask types is a really good way to weave a narrative if you're selecting whiskies. So I always try and have like an American oak in there, a European oak, a wine cask, a chinkapin, a Mizunara cask, because you can sort of tell the history of whiskey making just using those casks alone. The ABVs are important when you're choosing whiskies, because you've got to get into the head of the people coming to your event or your guests or your clients, because just because you like a 55% sherry bomb, it doesn't mean they're going to. With the brand and distillery style of the whiskies, it's pretty easy if you're a brand ambassador, because that's already chosen for you. But if you're not and you're doing this on your own, picking the whiskies can actually be quite overwhelming, because there are thousands to choose from. So again, think about the narrative you want to tell with your guests over an hour. For example, so if I'm doing a whiskey tasting for total newcomers, I'll probably layer a lineup such as starting off with a blended Scotch, 40% ABV, move into a non-age statement single malt, same percentage. Then move into a 12-year-old single malt, maybe American oak, 40 to 46%. Something like a 15-year-old with European oak sherry, same percentage. And then finish off with something single malt, medium to lightly peated. And actually, just last week, I was doing a tasting with a similar lineup here in Aberdeenshire, a networking event. And I met a lady there who told me she hated whiskey, and asked her when was the last time she tried a whiskey, and she told me 30 years ago with her dad and her brother. So I gave her a little taste. I had some Dura's 8-year-old Caribbean Smooth, which is the rum cask, finished with me. She tasted it, her eyes lit up, and her first question was, where can I buy a bottle of this? The order is absolutely everything in whiskey tastings. Never start with your peat and sherry bombs first. Always go with your blends, your non-age statement, lighter casks, lower ABVs, and work your way up. The guests don't have to love every single whiskey you put in front of them. The whole point of having 5 whiskeys is just to showcase the versatility and the spectrum of flavors of brands, distilleries, and different whiskeys. But there will always be a favorite when you ask people at the end. So after all said and done, once you've got your venue, your occasion, you know who's coming, you've packed all your boxes, you've checked all your boxes, you've got your whiskey, you've got your glasses, all your equipment, it all comes down to that one final hour. And hosting whiskey tastings is a performance, and you've got to treat it as such. You've got to be part host, part comedian, part waiter, bartender, walking history book, and QI episode all wrapped into one. So make them laugh in the first few minutes, tell them stories, be creative, be flexible, be entertaining, enlightening, and engaging, but above all else, just be yourself. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, if you want someone to just come and do all that for you, just send me an email at fraser@fraser-campbell.co.uk. And just remember, above all else, it's just a drink, it's there to be drunk, it's not become whiskey till the cork has been popped. Cheers.